Greetings, Starfighters. Welcome to episode 4 of season 10 of Shameless Cashgrab, being released in February. So, you know what that means. This is the month of the 7th anniversary of the show. Maybe I'll even have the episode out on the 7th anniversary since I'm recording this in the middle of January. Maybe. And there's going to be some other stuff for the anniversary coming. Maybe. I'm still kind of waiting to hear back from some people, but enough about the anniversary. A dandy and aspic. Of note here, the movie cites the score by Quincy Jones, which you may remember, we had a Quincy Jones score for The Deadly Affair, second movie of the season. One of the movie's stars is Tom Courtenay, who was the star of Otley, our previous movie. And another actor of note in this film, Mia Farrow. And considering that this is 1968, I think this would have been shortly after Rosemary's Baby, or at least around the same time as Rosemary's Baby, so she kind of would have been in demand at this point. So it's that probably would have been a big get for them. And it's our first R-rated movie that we've had for a while. Hopefully it'll actually deserve its R rating, unlike Swamp Shark. But yeah, we got MI6, Soviet agents. Yeah, fascinating, engaging thriller, and the final film credit for director Anthony Mann. I'm unfortunately not familiar with that name. I should probably look him up, because if they made a note of it on here, he must have been fairly prominent. I guess I need to turn into my film geek cred. There's probably a bunch of film nerds watching this going, "How do you not know who he is?" I'm terribly sorry. So a dandy and aspic. Let's do this. Okay, so I have watched A Dandy and Aspic from 1968. Plot summary, courtesy of Letterboxd. Double agent Alexander Eberlin is assigned by the British to hunt out a Russian spy known to them as Krasnevin. Only Eberlin knows that Krasnevin is none other than himself. Accompanying him on this mission is a ruthless partner, who gradually discovers his secret. Not really, but we'll get into that, as Eberlin tries to maneuver himself out of a desperate situation. To address something I mentioned in the video segment, Anthony Mann appears to have mostly done westerns, so that would explain why I hadn't seen any of his movies before. I don't generally do westerns. I've seen Shane, which was not one of his, and Blazing Saddles counts, albeit as a satire of the genre. Back to the Future 3? Anyway, for this movie, the first thing that strikes me as it opens is how much the score sounds like something from an 80s slasher movie, just minus the synths. That's actually pretty impressive. Is it a good fit for a 60s spy thriller, though? We'll see. Once the opening title sequence, sequence involving marionettes, clever, is over, it only just hit me that clever might sound sarcastic. I don't... I hope it didn't come across as sarcastic. I was not trying to be sarcastic there. I actually do think it was kind of clever. The movie proper opens on a funeral that is being watched by some as yet unidentified figures watching from a car. While the casket is being lowered, we get a flashback that strongly hints that the person in the box, identified to the audience at this point only as Nightingale, was shot and killed while diving off a high board by one of the pallbearers, who we learn is Eberlin, the double agent from the plot summary. We jump to nighttime, and Eberlin enters a club where we see Mia Farrow's character looking at him with interest from across the room as he sits down to eat. The very short scene then jumps to Eberlin getting in Mia Farrow's car, as he is clearly attempting to avoid one of the other pallbearers trying to get his attention outside the club, eventually ending up at her place where she shows him some of her work as a photographer. I don't particularly like Farrow's character, Caroline, so far, but points for her accent. I've certainly heard worse attempts at sounding British from American actors. So have many of you, I imagine. Leave me some of your favorites, or perhaps I should say least favorite examples, in the comments. I am totally saying that out of genuine curiosity and not just trying to get an algorithm boost. Anyway, Caroline reveals she'd actually seen Eberlin before in Tunisia and had a picture of him. He's clearly nervous about that, but tries to hide it. Caroline gets into some astrology stuff, and I pretty much tune out and wait for either the next topic or for the scene to change, whichever comes first. Eberlin manages to convince Caroline to let him have the photo, which he tears up as soon as he leaves. No sex scene, in case anyone was wondering. We cut to the next morning, presumably. Eberlin and the man who had been following him before are on their way to meet with someone important in whatever organization they work for. I think throughout they only ever refer to it as Command. I don't know why they couldn't have just called it MI6. Although it seems awfully small to be MI6. I don't know. It turns out that the follower was merely trying to inform Eberlin of the meeting. This leads to a chase scene. Somehow. I must have missed something. But whoever it was ends up falling off the back of a ferry and dies? I guess. That seems to be the implication, but the movie doesn't make it clear at all. This was also the point where Tom Courtenay, the lead of the previous movie this season, comes in, but he hasn't done much of anything yet. We go to Eberlin's workplace next, and we meet his supervisor, who, surprisingly for 1968, is a black man. Sorry, folks, the movie is woke now. YouTube grifters suck. Anyway, the supervisor tells Eberlin to attend a meeting the following Monday and has no choice in the matter. Eberlin then goes to speak to someone by the Thames, and we get from this exchange that Eberlin does not like living in the UK and would like to return to Russia, but for whatever reason, this is not an option for him. We go to the meeting Eberlin was ordered to attend. By the way, the movie has told us his real name by this point, but I'm just going to stick with Eberlin. And he gets a tour of the manor the meeting is being held at, complete with a gay joke about King James I. You know, on the one hand, I hate homophobia, but on the other hand, I hate monarchy, so not sure how I should feel about this one, to be honest. Moving on, at this meeting is where Gaddis, the character played by Tom Courtenay, and Eberlin are assigned to work together to hunt down an assassin who we already know is Eberlin himself. There's more to the meeting than that, but I won't go too deep into it. I do get a vibe that Gaddis already suspects Eberlin of something at this point, though he might be the only one. This scene is really well done, with effective use of zoom-ins, echoing dialogue, etc., and this is one of those rare times where I actually wish I used clips on this show, because I'm not sure I can actually do this part justice. Also, Gaddis is a real dick in this scene. I mean, he's right to be suspicious of Eberlin. The audience knows this full well. But their supervisors don't know this. Well, more on that later. From their POV, it looks like one of the agents they assigned to work with one of their other agents is being belligerent for no good reason. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't think Gaddis actually was suspicious of Eberlin yet in this scene. He's just like that. After Eberlin is shown a film by his bosses that they have of one of his contacts, he goes to that contact's apartment with a loaded gun, but the two end up having a conversation instead, with Eberlin learning his contact has developed a drug problem. The contact practically begs Eberlin to kill him after being outed as an addict, and after Eberlin tells him he's who his employers think the assassin they're after is. But Eberlin leaves instead. His and Eberlin's Soviet handlers show up to abduct the contact themselves, which Eberlin fails to stop. Well, more on that later. So after learning Eberlin has been sleeping with his assistant, which seems to have come out of nowhere, but I also ended up having to watch this movie over a couple of days due to so many reasons. I don't want to list them all, even if it would help me get this video to 20 minutes. Eberlin heads to Berlin, well, West Berlin. I need to remember when this movie was made. He goes there under an assumed name given to him by his UK superiors. The editing in the opening of the scene when he arrives in West Berlin is a bit awkward. which is uncharacteristic of the movie up to this point, which is the only reason I'm mentioning it. I honestly do not know what they were going for here. After riding a train to East Berlin, he unexpectedly runs into Caroline in a waiting area. After an awkward encounter, Eberlin attempts to get into East Berlin proper, something his Soviet superiors had explicitly told him not to do. But it does not go well, and he nearly gets shot by East German guards. Sheepishly taking a train back to West Berlin, along with Caroline, who missed most of the drama and was also not allowed in. She'd been hoping to get some photographs for her portfolio and was denied entry because of her camera. A paranoid Eberlin starts to wonder if Caroline has been following him, which she denies. Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and say it right now. She wasn't. This is all just a coincidence. Sorry for the spoilers. Eberlin eventually meets Gaddis again, along with another agent. While Gaddis is unaware of Eberlin's failed attempt to return to the Soviet bloc, and he is, we find this out later too, he remains as abrasive as ever. If we, the audience, didn't already know Eberlin was a double agent, Gaddis might come across as a rather clumsy attempt at a red herring. Heck, in a lesser movie, he probably would be. Eberlin meets with Caroline again shortly after this. There is a bit of what I guess you could call a car chase. The difficulty here is Eberlin is trying to not look like he's trying to lose a shadow while Caroline is in the car. Also, and this is really more the fault of my childhood than the movie, but the fact that the person tailing Eberlin is following him in a VW Beetle is amusing to me. I lost count of how many times I watched the Herbie movies, or at least the first 3 of them, as a kid. This all leads to implied sex, which was really all a mainstream movie could do in 1968. Afterwards, the person who'd been following Eberlin earlier turns up at his hotel and claims to be working with Gaddis, and is also a bit of a dork, and mumbles enough that I really wish this DVD came with closed captioning because I could only understand about half of what he said. It's the chop shop owner from The Deadly Affair all over again. Eberlin understood him enough, though, to pick up on the holes in his story, and this leads to a fight where the man is nearly killed when Eberlin slams his head into the bottom of the bathtub several times. The man, who used the fake name Henderson, was working for Eberlin's Soviet handler, and something he said before the fight's conclusion hints that there are doubts about Eberlin's loyalty. Which is hilarious considering how hard he's been trying to return to Russia this whole time. But the thing about spying is, it can make you paranoid. That's why people always say if you ever find yourself tempted to put a tracking app on your significant other's phone or vehicle, it's probably time to break up. Because even if they're not doing anything, your paranoia is going to end up driving them away. Wow, that was quite the sidetrack. Eberlin's morning gets even more tense when, after deciding to not finish off Henderson, he returns to his room at the end of the hall, and Caroline is left, but Gaddis is there waiting for him, telling him to hurry up and get dressed so they can continue their mission. There's about 41 minutes left in the movie, so safe to say Eberlin's not going to have a good day. After a meeting with a Soviet agent in an elevator and a British agent in a restaurant, Eberlin's desperation gets harder and harder for him to mask. We then get a sequence of Gaddis following Eberlin, and I think he might finally be starting to suspect Eberlin is actually the assassin. That or he's still just being a dick. Either is plausible at this juncture. Either way, Gaddis ends up saving Eberlin from being caught up in a police raid on what I guess was supposed to be a brothel operating out of a gym. Gaddis chastises Eberlin for trying to use a pimp as a source to try and find their target, so I guess he doesn't actually suspect Eberlin yet, just doesn't like him. Or anybody, but I imagine I've conveyed that well enough by now. Of course, that's not actually what Eberlin was doing. He was trying to see if this person he clearly knew could help him sneak over the wall into East Berlin. Later, Gaddis interrupts Eberlin and Caroline. Caroline tells Eberlin she loves him, of course. And Gaddis looks uncomfortable with the whole thing, and to be fair, I can't blame him. The thing about Caroline is, she's basically a prototype of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. If you don't know what that is, just look it up on DuckDuckGo. Because Google sucks now. Gaddis takes Eberlin to get the drop on Henderson, who Gaddis had spotted when the man who Gaddis describes as an amateur attempted to tail him, that Henderson was the amateur. Gaddis states his intent to interrogate Henderson, figuring it wouldn't take much effort. And we're less than a half hour from the end now, so safe to say things are looking bad for our protagonist. Eberlin is able to kill Henderson by tricking him into thinking he'd help him get away. Gaddis appears to think that Eberlin jumped the gun, no pun intended, by shooting Henderson when he tried to run. The two attempt to flee the scene, but are cut off by a pair of Russian agents in the alleyway, including the one Eberlin talked to in the elevator earlier. Gaddis and the Russian have an oddly friendly exchange about Henderson being killed, the Russian even offering Gaddis a cigar and the two trading quips about American currency. The Russian does have a great line during this exchange when he says, and I rarely do this, but I actually rewound the film to make sure I got this right. The killer wolf who leaves his card soon becomes the prey. Let me try that again. Actually, let me try that again with a bad Russian accent, because why the hell not? The killer wolf who leaves his cards soon becomes the prey. An old Russian proverb I made up this morning. Great line. Chef's kiss. No notes. He and Gaddis make an arrangement for the identity of the assassin in exchange for money, the Russian guy arguing that since the British want him so bad, he's no use to the Soviets anymore. It's unclear at this point how much, if any, of the exchange Eberlin heard while sitting in Gaddis' car, along with the other Russian. The two sides meet again in the forest at daytime, Gaddis with half of the money, and the Russian with a place where he can find out the identity of the assassin. Eberlin still has no idea if he's about to be sold out, or if the Russians will be sacrificing a metaphorical pawn in order to keep him in place in Britain. Gaddis and Eberlin then go to the racetrack, where we learn that everything that has happened since Gaddis got off the plane has taken place over a mere 2 days. Gaddis talks to a racer. What this is about, I have no idea, but it'll probably pay off very soon, given how close to the end we are. That night, or the next night, it's not clear, Gaddis and Eberlin are called to a closed mall, where they find the body of a British agent named Copperfield in a photo booth, with the implication that he is supposed to be the double agent assassin, which Gaddis doesn't want to believe. So shocked, in fact, he shows an emotion other than contempt for once. The planted evidence seems to convince Gaddis, who then admits to Eberlin he thought it might have been him all along. The two then return to the racetrack, Gaddis suggesting that this is how he'll be getting the second half of the money to pay off the Russian from earlier. There's a tense exchange between them and the Russian at the racetrack that Caroline is a witness to, as she's there by coincidence. And yes, I am totally dead serious here. No sarcasm. She is there by coincidence. Yeah, I'm actually not sure I really need to say that strongly. I'm pretty sure you all believed me when I said that earlier, but yeah. Then, the driver we saw Gaddis talking to earlier causes a crash. In the chaos amongst the fans, Gaddis shoots the Russian. There's a goof in the framing of this scene, though. It kind of looks like the Russian guy fell over, despite there being a civilian clearly in the line of fire when Gaddis used his walking stick gun that he'd been carrying with him the whole movie. So that's a bit of an oops. But regardless, Eberlin and Caroline part ways, with him telling her he doesn't need her anymore and to go home and that he envies her. He and the other agent who'd been with Gaddis get to an airport to leave Berlin on a military craft. Eberlin calls in to his Soviet handler, who tells him that it was the British who'd killed his contact with the drug problem, not them. I was actually a bit confused at this at first, but then looking back, I realized while the car was similar and the guy in the back seat looked similar from behind to the Soviet handler, it wasn't actually explicitly shown that it was them. So yeah, okay, that reveal was handled well. There are a couple of other questions I have, but we'll get to that. Eberlin panics, as this means that the British have likely known he was the man they were looking for the whole time. The other agent admits to Eberlin that they did know the whole time, and had been using him to find all the other members of his, I guess, cell, for want of a better term. Ironically, though, Gaddis had been the one agent in the operation who didn't know. Not until after the incident at the racetrack, anyway. You know, honestly, given his attitude, I can see why. Actually, a guy who's that much of a dick honestly seems like a liability to an intelligence operation, but, that's not my department. So, anyway, yeah, okay. They're walking Eberlin towards the plane, and then Eberlin turns and sees, in a car on the tarmac, Gaddis glowering at him. And then the other agent and the pilot of the military plane turned their back, so I'm guessing this was whole staged. But so he makes a run at Eberlin with his car, Gaddis, obviously. Eberlin fires at Gaddis, and we do see the bullet going through the windshield, but it cuts really quick, so it's kind of ambiguous if Eberlin actually hit him or not. But the freeze frame and noise we get right before cutting to the end credits tells me that Eberlin was definitely run over and almost certainly killed by the car either way. The end. And I'm wondering, was losing Copperfield part of the plan? That seems like a bad plan, honestly. Or do they consider that one collateral damage or some shit? I mean, well, anyway. Random thoughts I had while watching the movie. I bet the opening title sequence of the movie would be amazing to watch while high. 2. Many of the filmmaking techniques used in this film have become passé in the intervening decades, to the point they were pretty much only ever used in homages and parodies even by the time I was born, so seeing them used straight did take a bit of getting used to for me. But for when it was made, this was very effective at conveying moods like tension. 3. The score isn't actually much to write home about, despite it being done by Quincy Jones. 4. There are a few minor characters in the movie that are amusing, but I wasn't really sure where to fit them in my script. 5. For the second time this season, I have encountered an R-rated movie with no swearing. Series. Not season. Series. Come on, man. And this one actually just occurred to me. 6. Wow. So much of the British plans to clean up Eberlin's, operation relied on him not being able to cross into Soviet territory. They got lucky. They were lucky that the Soviets decided to just, cut and run with Eberlin, and near as we can tell, they'd actually made that decision before the movie even started. Final verdict. The movie has its faults, not just the ones I already mentioned, but also it is oddly bloodless and sexless for an R-rated movie. I think the most blood we see is on Copperfield's shirt when they find his body. But I respect it taking the angle of showing how depressing the life of a spy can be, and let's be real, probably is far more often than not in real life. I think a lot of civilians base their idea on what spycraft is like almost entirely on films and TV, even if they are aware that it's all exaggerated for dramatic effect. All in all, I'd say I liked it, mostly. Could be a bit slow in places, and some of the non-English characters come across, perhaps I should say non-British characters come across as stereotypes rather than real people, but that was hardly a rarity in film in the 1960s. Heck, it can still be an issue now. Also, the exchanges between Eberlin and Gaddis could get a bit repetitive. I mean, if you wanted to oversimplify, you could basically describe pretty much every action between them from up until the end of the movie as, I don't like you, and I don't like you either. Still, I was invested in what was going on, and Eberlin manages to be a somewhat sympathetic character despite being a spy and a murderer. Not a level of nuance I'd expect from any movie made in the 1960s, let alone one about Soviet agents at the height of the Cold War. So yeah, while certainly dated, I'd be willing to say it's worth a watch. Anywho, tune in next time when we get to a movie called Hammerhead. Alas, not the shark movie with Jeffrey Combs. Have fun. Stay safe. Oh yeah, by the way, the black guy does not die in this movie, but he also kind of disappears entirely for the second half.